A young sailor on the USS Arizona hummed a tune, wiping down a railing. As the sun began to warm the deck, unknown to him, 183 aircraft appeared. These aircraft were already closing on the quiet harbor. In just 90 minutes, 2,403 American lives would be gone. It was just before 7:48 a.m. on December 7, 1941. Commander Fuchida, a pilot whose months of intensive training had sharpened him. For this precise moment, Fuchida guided the first wave of Japanese planes across Oahu. His mission: to cripple the United States Pacific Fleet anchored just ahead. Japan's empire had stretched across Asia, but American oil sanctions were now severe pressure. If their gamble to neutralize American naval power in the Pacific failed here today, their aspirations for regional dominance would simply evaporate. Fuchida's voice crackled across the radio, a signal for the unfolding events. Below, the men of the fleet were waking to another ordinary Sunday. Breakfast was being served, routine duties were beginning. On Ford Island, Seaman William Mann glanced skyward. Aircraft were diving, an unusual sight so early. He squinted, trying to make sense of strange maneuvers. Then he saw it, the stark red circle painted on the wings. Moments later, the very first bombs ripped into the stillness. Fuchida's first wave swiftly divided into precise strike groups. Nakajima B, 5N torpedo bombers skimmed the water at an astonishing 40 feet. Their torpedoes, specially modified with wooden fins, operated effectively. They were heading directly for Battleship Row. On the USS Oklahoma, Ensign Bill Ingram saw the incoming aircraft. He instinctively reached for the general quarters alarm, but time had run out. Most anti-aircraft ammunition was locked away, its keys held by duty officers still ashore. A thunderous explosion announced the first torpedo tearing into the Oklahoma's port side. Seawater rushed through massive, jagged holes as the battleship lurched, beginning its dramatic list. In the growing darkness below decks, water surged. The massive vessel began to roll. Men scrambled up ladders that were rapidly becoming horizontal, a desperate, impossible ascent for many. High above, Aichi D-3A dive bombers screamed down at nearly vertical angles toward the USS Arizona. At 8:06 a.m., a 1,760-pound bomb dropped with terrifying accuracy. Penetrated the ship's forward deck. It detonated the forward magazine in a colossal explosion of gunpowder. The blast wave flung men into the water with devastating force. Machinist's mate Robert Benton on the neighboring USS Vestal was blown clear into the harbor's burning oil-slicked waters. Fuchida circled overhead, watching immense smoke columns. The Oklahoma was already capsized, her exposed hull a grim, inverted tomb. But even amidst this stunning success, Fuchida felt a growing unease. The harbor was full of battleships, yet the American aircraft carriers were nowhere to be seen. Their absence was a profound strategic oversight. On Ford Island, Chief Ordnance Man John Finn, without hesitation, dragged a .50 caliber machine gun into the open. He began firing relentlessly at the attacking aircraft. Rounds kicked up dirt around him, debris tore into his arm. He continued unflinching, pouring fire into the sky. Above, Japanese bomber pilot Janichi Goto completed his run. On the West Virginia, his rear gunner spotted movement below. A destroyer was underway. The USS Helm, under Commander Chester Carroll, was making a desperate dash toward the harbor entrance. On the Helm's bridge, Carroll gripped the rail as machine gun fire stitched across the water. The destroyer wove desperately, bullets pinging off its superstructure, but it pressed on, finally reaching the open sea. Near the dry docks, bomber pilot Tadashi Kusumi lined up. His approach on the USS Pennsylvania, exposed and vulnerable in dry dock number 1. Evasion was impossible. The first bomb slammed into the boat deck, another into the ship's castle. Fuchida, still searching, widened his circling pattern. He keyed his radio, words carrying concern. No carriers, I repeat, no carriers. Back on the carrier Akagi, Admiral Nagumo received the news. America's most dangerous weapons had eluded their grasp. In the Navy Command Center, Admiral Kimmel stared at the unfolding chaos, but there was no time for contemplation. "Get a message to Washington," he commanded. "Air raid Pearl Harbor. This is not a drill." At 8:54 a.m., 170 more aircraft led by Lieutenant Commander Shimazaki arrived. But this was a dramatically different Pearl Harbor. Anti-aircraft fire now filled the sky. Furious, concentrated defense. On the USS Nevada, the only battleship actively underway, Ensign Joe Tausig directed fire despite severe personal injury. Shrapnel had torn into his leg, nearly severing it, but he tied a tourniquet. He remained at his post. The Nevada's guns barked as she steamed toward the harbor entrance. With the channel threatened, an order came to beach her. The Nevada turned hard, deliberately ran aground at Hospital Point, her guns defiantly continuing to fire. Fuchida's planes hammered the beached Nevada and any target they could find. Meanwhile, at Wheeler Field, Second Lieutenants George Welch and Kenneth Taylor sprinted to their P-40 Warhawks. Against standing orders, they took off into the maelstrom. Welch spotted Japanese dive bombers pulling up after their runs. He closed in, his guns hammering. One bomber disintegrated in midair, then another. At 9:45 a.m., Fuchida fired a flare, the signal to withdraw. The Japanese aircraft turned north, heading back toward their carriers, 200 miles away. Below them, Pearl Harbor burned. Black smoke towered into the sky. The Arizona was a flaming tomb. The Oklahoma floated upside down, a tragic silhouette. On the oil-slicked water, hundreds of men swam through flickering flames, their desperate cries echoing. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Fuqua waded through knee-deep water on the Arizona's quarterdeck, helping to organize human chains to pass injured sailors to rescue boats. At the Naval Hospital, personnel worked amidst immense pressure. The wounded arrived continuously, laid on floors, on tables in every available space. On Ford Island, sailors stared at the destruction. Seaman James Corey looked at the capsized Oklahoma, knowing his best friend was in the ship's quarters. It was clear he would not be recovered. The attack had lasted just 90 minutes. Yet the devastation was profound. 2,403 Americans had lost their lives, 2,008 Navy, 218 Army, 109 Marines, and 68 civilians. Another 1,178 were wounded. 8 battleships were damaged or destroyed. The Oklahoma, Arizona, and Utah were complete losses, never to return to service. But the California and West Virginia would be raised and eventually return to the fight. The Nevada, despite her severe damage, would be repaired and serve throughout the entire war. Japan's victory that day was a tactical triumph, but its larger strategic implications were deeply damaging. The American aircraft carriers, their primary targets, were at sea and completely untouched. More critically, the Japanese failed to destroy Pearl Harbor's vital fuel storage, its repair facilities, and its submarine base. These strategic assets would prove indispensable to the Allied war effort. Admiral Yamamoto reportedly observed, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." The very next day, President Roosevelt stood before Congress and delivered a declaration that would echo through history, a date which will live in infamy. America, previously divided, on entering World War II, united overnight. Recruitment offices overflowed. The industrial might of the United States shifted with overwhelming force toward war production. Japan had gambled everything on one decisive blow, and in a profound twist of fate, that blow had fundamentally failed to achieve its ultimate strategic objective. It was not the end, but merely the beginning. 6 months later, American and Japanese carriers would meet. in a confrontation that would forever reshape the Pacific War.